how much it is liked by the general public, rather than despite the public hating it like Transformers or Fast and Furious. Surprisingly, even in 2018, there are dozens of movies that do not feature a superhero that came out this year. Today, we want to talk about what these movies outside the action blockbuster genre can learn from the success of the MCU, and possibly from some of their failings. We're here today with Jack Nugent, who runs his own YouTube channel called Now You See It, and he's a bit of a movie buff. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, good to be here, Thomas.
I'm also joined by our long-standing host of the podcast, Chris.
Thomas, I want to take issue with you just seeing Fast and Furious.
All right.
It's an amazing series, and I hate you. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Wow. Starting off very, very aggressive.
Did you have that ready? Because you saw what he was going to say. So you're prepared.
I was above board on all of this, Chris. This is a little late to...
He made edits to this. Anyway, sorry.
So I sort of want to start off with just a film analysis of why people like big superhero movies, specifically ones in the MCU, because there have been some bad ones, but generally speaking, they're well liked by the general public. And there must be something in the craft that helps it do that.
See, that's what happens when you have someone like Kevin Feige in charge, because not only is he a big comic book nerd, but he's also had a lot of training being just a film producer. So having been in the industry, he kind of knows how it works. He knows what formulas work. And I guess when eventually Disney gets to the mix, you can probably argue that they would probably have some hand, because they have kind of, I'm not sure if perfected is the right word, but they have a familiar formula that people have been going to for decades. What that formula really consists of, I guess that's really up to us to kind of figure out, but not to say that Marvel Studios is doing the same damn thing over and over again, but they found a groove, they found a rhythm, and they know how to hit all those points with both fans of the comic books and also just general moviegoers. I'm speaking as someone who did not read a lot of comic books, but I am just so into these movies. So that's how it's been working for me, at least.
Let's see. Who's the guy who plays Thanos? What's his name?
Josh Brolin.
So, I remember this, when I read what we were going to talk about, I thought of this interview that he did on some show, some Tonight Show.
Oh, yeah.
And where he talks about how, Kevin and all the other producers will, throw a barbecue party, and they'll just, sit around and plan, the next 8 years of the MCU. And that image has, ever since I heard him say that, it struck a chord in my mind of just how just the image of being at a barbecue and just throwing around tease Thanos, and then the next show in the next movie we'll do this, and then this superhero will come, and it's just this is you nailed this too, Chris, but it's a feat of production, and that's also what Fast and Furious and Transformers also are, is they're feats of, these are production feats, these are these
right.
There's something to be said just to the organizational clout that these it's I don't know, we're at in an age of incredible production planning.
But do you think that Transformers and Fast and Furious has that kind of planning behind it? At least with Transformers, it feels like each new movie was invented after the box office release of the last one.
Marvel can do it all, but Transformers has this special effects coordination is a production feat.
Yeah,
that, because the first Transformers looks really good, and it still looks amazing, and it's because Michael Bay knew he knows how to integrate the special effects. But that's so I don't know if you could be as reductive as Transformers can do special effects production incredibly well, and Fast and Furious can do whatever. I don't know what it can do. But just that.
I can go on and on.
Yeah,
about
and maybe you should at some point, because these aren't movies, they're like production, like these universes are like, I don't know. I think they could be approached differently than you would approach like a movie, because it's a feat of production before it's like a feat of filmmaking. If that makes sense.
I think I really like that Brolin anecdote, because when you think about people planning out years and years in movies, you usually think of like people in a sterile boardroom, with like PowerPoint slideshows and maybe like graphs and demographics and like charts and all that stuff. Whereas like Brolin kind of depicted it as this very casual, chill, just like people who love comic book characters and are just kind of like nerding out and be like, oh, what if this character did this? What if this character did that? And in kind of the same vein of like characterizing today's production as like it's kind of like an assembly line almost, like studios are just like pumping out movies like just mindlessly. So I think having the added passion for these established characters, because they were already from the comic books, having that has kind of like been, I think, an X factor.
Yes.
Whereas like when you listen to Michael Bay talk about Transformers, there's a lot of reverence for Transformers, for like the toy line and the cartoons. Michael Bay does not have any of that.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah, and the other thing, which I guess they used to do, is like people would make one movie, and then like hope for a sequel, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So like it was So sequels are like an expansion pack kind of sometimes.
Yeah.
Like that's the pitfall. But to your point, it's like now it's different. It's different now because you plan like movies ahead.
And,
I don't know.
Yeah, I think you don't pitch movies anymore. You pitch franchises. You pitch like, all right, there's this world, and we're going to take a place movie here, and then in the next one, like that is how I imagine the conversations are going now. Is it's not enough to say we're going to make a successful movie. Like you have to say is we're going to make a successful franchise that will continue on. Now, but like to Chris's point, it sounds like one big part is that like movies made based on like previously existing content. So like in this case it's comics, in some cases it's books, like that kind of thing. Like it sounds like having a director or the creative people behind the movie being a fan of that original content is like critical to getting it across, because they understand innately what makes it appealing to audiences because they are part of that audience.
And that's why Bumblebee looks significantly better than any of the Bay stuff, because Travis Knight, he's the director. He also did Kubo and the Two Strings. You see a lot, like when you watch those trailers, they resemble those 80s cartoons a lot more, down to like the sound effects, to the character designs, and you see a lot of people more excited about this, even though like, the announcement, like seeing on paper, oh, a Bumblebee spinoff just sounds just asinine to you, but you actually watch it, like, oh, this is actually a little bit like what I remember and what I liked. So it really goes to show like how important it is to find the right creatives, like the actual boots on the ground filmmakers. So you can be politicking and negotiating in those boardrooms all you like, but it really comes down to who you actually hire. And you see all of these attempts at franchises live and die depending on their hiring practices. That's why I think Marvel has really worked well, because they make, for the most part, they make good hires. And then you see DC, which is just kind of faltering, and you see other stuff like, I'm sure Thomas, you, Izzy, and Anthony talked about this on your two-parter, but like, the Dark Universe. And
well, because I think with DC, they were looking for filmmakers who had name brand recognition, right? Like people who'd done similar work and who were good filmmakers in the first place. But again, I don't know why I was about to call him Zac Efron. That is not who made
Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder. I do not think Zack Snyder was a fan of the source material. He was a good filmmaker with his own distinctive style. I don't think he was able to capture what was cool about the characters, like from the fan perspective, because he wasn't one.
His concept of Superman is completely contradictory to the comic book idea.
Right. Which isn't necessarily awful, but I think that changes should be made from the perspective of like some reverence for
Yeah,
what came before.
absolutely.
And it sort of seemed like he was bored by what was available before and
Yeah,
wanted to change
and
things up radically.
one more thing about Zack Snyder is that he is a director who is not as fixated on story and themes. He's more fixated on imagery. So when you watch Batman v Superman, like he you can tell he's obsessed about The Dark Knight Returns, as like the comic book The Dark Knight Returns that Frank Miller did, because he pulled a lot of imagery from that. But thematically, they were not the same at all, and that story was like, for lack of a better term, just plain bad. I was rewatching Watchmen last night. Actually, I fell asleep to Watchmen last night, and if you read some like anecdotes about Zack Snyder on the set, he had the comic Watchmen with him the entire time on set because he wanted it to match the exact imagery. And you can argue that maybe he didn't really like pick up on the deeper political subtext and context. So that's different people have different approaches. So I don't think Marvel really has anyone like that.
And that is interesting to note that I think that an important part is the focus on character and getting the characters right. Whether that means adapting what was good from the source material or whether that means sort of reinventing a character the way that I feel that they had to do with Thor.
Right.
But keeping the stories focused on your central protagonist learning and growing, even in this ever-expanding mass of movies, each one has to be about character.
Jack, do you have any spiels or anything to say before I rant about Fast and Furious?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I was thinking,
Please.
this is like, will have to come up eventually, obviously, but like the problem, this is like, I was going to say it as a problem, but now Chris made me think differently about it, but there's like how Edgar Wright left, and Christopher Miller and Phil, what are their names? I always mix them up. The one
Chris Miller and Phil Lord, or is it the other way around? Lord and Miller, just say Lord and Miller.
Yeah, Lord and Miller. Because they like left due to creative differences for the Han Solo movie, and then like Edgar Wright left Ant-Man, and so I see these as like at first or like until Chris said some stuff, and I'll get to it. I thought that those is like exclusively tragic, because like I think about how Ant-Man is so it's so like a visual, like there's so much visual comedy in that movie, and how Edgar Wright wrote it that way so that he could like make it in his own image. And then he quit for some reason, and I bet the movie would have been much better. But I wonder, like when it comes to picking directors, that like you should have, like Edgar Wright is sick, but I wonder like if he doesn't really care like about the comic book aspect of it and doesn't have that passion, and so he was injecting his own style to the point that it like wasn't within the bounds of the production that Kevin and those other guys like had envisioned. And so but then you got like Taika Waititi, who, but I guess his that was a case where Thor needed to be much different, and so he was happy to
shake things up.
Like shaking things up was okay, but I guess like in the case of Ant-Man, it didn't fit the mold enough. So that's like a
right.
So that was like but that's like maybe Edgar Wright leaving was like a good thing, and not just a tragedy, because otherwise the Marvel universe wouldn't be like consistent enough.
And I think there are certain ways that are friendly, like shake things up. I think Taika like correctly understood that like what is actually happening in the world is slightly less important as long as it's like consistent with the mythology, and that like what was more important was like stripping everything away from the character of Thor so he can stop being so fucking entitled. And like certain stuff like that where like there was a recognized need to shake things up around this stale character, whereas with Ant-Man's introduction, I think that it's even more important in introductory stories to get the introduction of the character and have the story be focused around that character, so that when you throw him into new stories in the future, he's more established, people know him a little bit better, like they're invested in it. And I can imagine that like a visual comedy kind of circus would have been really fun to watch, but it would have not served having that character go on to do other things in the future, right?
Yeah. So a couple things. it's interesting you mentioned like Taika Waititi is the best example of that, because I think I've read a few interviews with him that gave very good insight on how Marvel Studios selects people. So I've always had an impression that Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige and all those dudes will have their own preconceived idea of like what these movies will be. So, for example, Kevin Feige did that presentation where he announced all the new films. So like Thor Ragnarok shows up and it's like, fiery apocalyptic imagery for that logo that they show. And I imagine that, like, oh, this is going to be, like, a crazy, like, game-changing event where, like, Asgard gets destroyed. It's going to be this dark thing. And then they start talking to directors. So they probably have, like, a meeting with each director, and they will all give their own pitch. And Taika described his pitch. It's usually discouraged to bring a sizzle reel to these pitches, but Taika did. Because he's Taika Waititi. And he brought a sizzle reel that had a lot of footage from 80s movies, most specifically Big Trouble in Little China. And he must have, like, done or said something that was so captivating to Feige and all the rest, because, like, he got the job easily. So, like, maybe he was, like, like, Kevin Feige's idea is, like, oh, this is going to be, like, apocalyptic and crazy and game-changing for Thor. It's going to transform his character the same way the Winter Soldier did for Captain America. Taika Waititi's like, oh, I want to do this really funny thing where Thor is like Jack Burton from is like the character from Big Trouble in Little China, and he's always getting into trouble, and he loses his hammer and stuff like that, yada yada yada. There was a gladiator planet, and somehow Kevin Feige was like, yeah, these ideas are compatible. So it really is like the successful projects are usually like a very happy marriage of the studio and the individual ideas. And that's why maybe Edgar Wright's idea, maybe they found out later that it wasn't compatible. Like they tried to get Ava DuVernay to make either Captain Marvel or Black Panther, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So like they were like, Ava DuVernay was like, oh, I didn't feel like I would be making an Ava DuVernay movie with Marvel. I would be making a Marvel movie. So obviously, like whatever she had in mind was not compatible with Marvel Studios' vision. Likewise, Patty Jenkins was supposed to do The Dark World. She wanted to do like a Romeo and Juliet romance movie, and I guess Marvel just didn't really want that. So again, they might have different ideas, but as long as they're able to fit together, like that's it. You can make something really weird and unique like Ragnarok, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That was good. That's good.
I should finish watching Big Trouble in Little China at some
point.
I
watched it as research for Ragnarok, because I also saw that interview, and so I went and watched it. And like as I'm watching it, I was like, how can this possibly be relevant? It was a super
It's
weird
a little
movie.
racist, too.
It's incredibly racist. But it is weird more so than it is anything else.
I get it, though, because it's like, it's a big part is like, in Taika was talking about, like, Kurt Russell's character. He's always getting confused and asking questions, but he always, like, does something anyway, the same way Thor does in Ragnarok. Like, Thor is thrown in this crazy, crazy world and situation, and he comically fights his way through it.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I have here to talk about the use of comedy as either a strength or a downside. Obviously, there's a big appeal to knowing that you're going to walk into a Marvel movie, and even if things get kind of intense, there's going to be some hefty comic relief going on, which makes it more palatable while still being able to like tell the events of the story that you want to tell. But it has also come under fire for undercutting the emotional weight of certain scenes or films. Guardians and Ragnarok are like the biggest examples of how sort of comedy is used at every possible turn and like completely infused into it. I mean, what do you think is the takeaway from this experiment? Like you have a wide range from like Thor: The Dark World to Guardians of the Galaxy 2 in terms of how much comedy is infused into the story. Do you think that there's any evidence that like there's a correct answer?
I think they've all been, like, all the funny ones, like, I think it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I guess maybe it's kind of weird that in Thor Ragnarok, literally his like whole planet is over, and then he like it's like kind of like that's like the saddest thing ever, and then his like dad died. But there's like a little implication of PTSD in the
Infinity War.
Infinity War.
Yeah.
So, but like, so if in the second Infinity War, they like talk more, or he talks more. I assume there's going to be more addressing this, and he's going to some way overcome the PTSD, like in some with some metaphorical something he'll do. I think it'll be earned. I think it'll be good. But yeah, it would have been more. But I don't know. It wouldn't be as fun. Like if he was actually like a PTSD person, then it wouldn't be fun.
I mean, when you look at like Iron Man 3, where he explicitly suffers from PTSD in the movie, it's just that it happens to be that Tony Stark like copes with negative emotions through comedy. Like that's his person. And they've sort of said, hey, that worked really well. Let's do that for a dozen characters. But I mean, it does work. Like the jokes are funny, and if you're going in looking for a good laugh, you almost always get it. So, I mean, on one spectrum, yeah, it sounds like you're on board.
Yeah, I think
as
I'm on
much.
board. I like when they're funny.
Yeah. What do you think,
Yeah,
Chris?
I mean, obviously it depends on whose voice it is. So, like Avengers 1 and 2, they have very Joss Whedon-y quips. So you're either already into it or already against it. And then you got like Taika Waititi, we've already talked about him so much, but it felt like it was his own original voice. And that's why, if you've seen like Hunt for the Wilder People or What We Do in the Shadows, you kind of recognize that and you kind of get a little more enjoyment out of that. At the same time, in terms of undercutting stuff, like the fact that his planet blew up, and then Korg, the character voiced by Taika Waititi, kind of cracked a joke. I don't know how that got through, but it's still kind of interesting. And likewise, that's why I like Iron Man 3 a lot, because it perfectly. It's a very Shane Black movie. Like, it feels more like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang 2 more than it does Iron Man 3. Which is why I think a few Iron Man fans did not like Iron Man 3. But it really depends on how you use it, like when you use it. If it's like when you watch Thor: The Dark World, a lot of the gags there felt like they were added in reshoots, because someone must have looked at an early cut and someone must have been like, okay, we gotta add more jokes, and like they probably added it in this very mathematic and not organic way, like, oh, this will be the great time for a joke, but it kind of falls flat because it's lame or it doesn't really fit. And also the people behind For the Dark World, like some TV director who did Game of Thrones, like, is not really that much of a comedic voice. And that's how I felt watching Justice League, the movie, because they had Joss Whedon do reshoots. And every time a joke was made on Justice League, you can tell it was a Joss Whedon edition made from a studio note that this scene was not funny enough. So eventually you train your ear to recognize when a joke is organic or not, when it comes from a real voice or when it comes from a studio note. And I think the ratio for Marvel is higher, more organic, less so studio notes, but like, I feel like Justice League is such a prime example of like a very artificial feeling movie. Like, it felt like someone had a stopwatch and was like timing every single joke.
Yeah, like Ragnarok is like the antidote, because Taika Waititi like loves improv.
Yeah.
So it's like the most organic jokes ever. I don't know if this is true, but I don't remember where I heard this, but that he would like improvise Korg stuff to the point that it would like cost a lot of money to like reanimate Korg speaking jokes that aren't scripted. So it would cost like $10,000 to like add his one-liner or whatever, or like something crazy. And that's just like so funny because he's just the man. Like, what a guy.
Yeah.
Bless that man.
I also love what it was. People, like, he said like 80% of the movie was improvised, and everyone like ran with that, and like that was like a headline thing, like 80% of Thor Ragnarok improvised. And then in a later interview, he was like, Well, I improvised that number, so I don't...
It's so funny. I'm
It's
so
just
glad he did it so well.
It just defies the kind of like metrics that I think Chris is talking about. It would not be possible to leave studio notes on the length of jokes in that kind of a movie.
Yeah. Like, seriously, like, Justice League, the studio mandated that this movie should be exactly 2 hours long. No, they said less than 2 hours long, and the movie was 1 hour and 59 minutes, including credits.
Wow, what a bad
And I was
sign.
like, you...
Like, yo,
This is like a...
Yeah, I didn't see Justice League, like, I don't know, and I probably never will, I guess. But, yeah, if you told me, like, before I saw a movie, or no, if you just told me a movie was required to be under 2 hours, and it was an hour 59, I'd be like, oh, that movie sucks. Like, what a bad idea.
Yeah.
I don't know, not a bad idea, but I guess, like, it just, the fact that it's a minute, or it's an hour 59, means that they, like, the edits are not organic, they're, like, forced edits. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, if it was, like, an hour 50, they were just like, I don't know. It's just, like, what a bad sign.
Yeah, and it's you know, especially when you dig in deeper and find out more behind the scenes stuff. So like, I think it was The Wrap that had the story about how a lot of creative decisions on it's like a long story, and I couldn't tell you how one thing led to the other, but basically studio executives wanting bonuses led to bad creative decisions on Justice League.
I feel like the solution to a lot of these issues is that studios should be very upfront with their requirements for a movie. And I think if you sit the director who's like prospectively going to be doing this movie down and say, hey, like, this is what we're looking to get out of it. Like, we do need to set up this like future plot line. Like, we do need the character to go from here to there. Like, those are some non-negotiable things. Also, we'd prefer like a faster paced like action movie, and then just kind of get out of the way. I feel like that is the appropriate way to do studio like director interaction, is just make the things up front, and then don't, when you get the final cut, don't be like, oh, actually, you know, send it back to the kitchen and get a bunch of stuff done. In my like observing of movies that have done reshoots or like extensive like post-production intervention and editing, it has never really turned out well. And yeah.
Well, this is like what Chris said about Taika. Like, the way they do it is like directors come down and pitch their idea,
right?
And so it's like, it's almost like, like Kevin has like a hit, like his own little idea, and then he hears people pitch their own ideas and decides if they fit, as opposed to like a director. Yeah, so it is like what you said. It's like Marvel does the opposite or whatever. Yeah, like
right.
They see if it's a good fit, as opposed to like fitting them into something. Like the difference would be is someone would pitch a movie and Kevin would be like, oh, how long do you want it to be? And they're like, oh, like 2 hours and 1 minute. And he'd be like, okay, well then we'll pick someone else. But like the Justice League is the opposite, where it's like you picked it. Oh, by the way, like it has to be under 2 hours.
Right,
or something.
exactly. Yeah.
That's like simple, but I think that like expounds into everything.
Oh no, yeah, the philosophy like bleeds into.
Yeah. So where Edgar Wright like made it with a mistake, I guess, would have been like Kevin didn't realize, and this is like extrapolating a lot, but like somebody didn't realize that Edgar Wright had an idea that didn't fit with what they thought. Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but like the discussions with Edgar Wright, like the very initial ones, would have happened very early on in the MCU.
Yeah, oh yeah, that was like a very long-running early thing, and then, you know, he had to make The World's End, which kind of delayed things, and then it wasn't really fitting in with the plans of the first Avengers, so they kept pushing it back, and it was just kind of a whole...
So, I mean, you can sort of see how, like, that
mess.
initial discussion was, like, not informed by their experience at this point.
Yeah.
Which is,
also,
I think, yeah.
I am shocked, like, whenever I remember Lord and Miller and Solo, because they were filming the damn movie when they got fired.
Yeah.
They had already shot footage, and then it was like, you know, Kathleen Kennedy is the equivalent of Feige. Like, she was like, okay, this is not working, you guys are gone.
Yeah.
And from what I've read from the trades, it sounds like it wasn't so... It was, like, creative differences, but it was more so cultural differences, like work culture. So Lord and Miller improvises a lot, whereas the Kasdans, who wrote the screenplay, they're, like, very by the word. You have to say the words verbatim.
Yeah.
And Lord Miller just kept shooting so many takes, and they were getting behind schedule. So I am so shocked that like they could not figure out that was going to happen before they started filming that damn thing. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, there's like a disconnect. Like when there's a disconnect, I guess it doesn't work out.
This conversation, for whatever reason, is also reminding me of Breaking Bad. And I think about Breaking Bad all the time because I think the big difference between TV shows that I really enjoy and TV shows that I don't like is not necessarily related to like the genre of the TV show or stuff like that. It's just like whether they had a plan like from the beginning. And Breaking Bad, I know they like knew how this story was going to play out. Like the details were figured out like, you know, episode by episode, but like they knew where this was going, like where certain characters were going to end up and that kind of thing. And then they were able to have a much more cohesive, like fulfilling show. Because in episode 1, the directors know, you know, to foreshadow the right things, like they know like to establish characters in a certain way so that they can change later. And it sounds like to some degree that's true of movie franchises as well.
That's a very good...
Thank you.
That's a very good tie-in. That's a very good way to tie Breaking Bad to MCU, and I never thought of that, which is like, this is good, because I never thought of that, and Breaking Bad is so good. And that was the thing, that like the reason Breaking Bad is the most revolutionary show ever is because he was the first person, like before that show, shows were, let's see how long we can stay on air. Exactly. And he was the first one to suggest, I want to make this about, he said that I want to make this about Mr. Rogers becoming Scarface. And so, like, he could have made as many seasons or whatever. He could have kept going, but he created he started with an end in mind. And so he knows where Walter White ends up. So, like, and the other thing is that he's, like, a writer first. So he, like, created a show, but he used to write shows. So he, like, can write a good episode. He can, like, help good episodes be written, but also think like a creator, like a producer. And so that is just like what Kevin does with the barbecue. The barbecue analogy is like, Vince is like producing with an end in mind, and like, so for every episode, he's like, is this a good episode? He knows, because he wrote X-File. He could write like one-off X-File episodes, and they would be great. Mm-hmm. But then he could also think like, and that's why Breaking Bad is so episodic. We're like, and that's like a different discussion. But like Netflix shows, they have no beginning or end, and they just like every episode is just like, it's just one giant movie that's 2 hours. But like he had like this is the episode where Pinkman and Walter White like are in the RV and they run out of gas, and then it like the show, each one like continues their like the impending ending. So yeah, it is the same. Like that's why Breaking Bad is so good, and I guess that's why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is so good. It's like the same thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned Breaking Bad, because I've also read a lot of stories and anecdotes about how they wrote that show. So like, yeah, they have the broad strokes kind of in mind already throughout the entire development. But when it gets to the nitty-gritty, so I'm going to spoil Season 2 for Breaking Bad. But Season 2 ends with this crazy, like, airplane collision. Right. And they kept foreshadowing that throughout the entire season, like down to like the episode titles foreshadowed it, which is nuts to me. They found Season 2 to be the hardest season to write, because they knew what the end point was, so they were trying to figure out like what to do in the middle to have it make sense. Yeah. In contrast, the beginning of Season 5 of Breaking Bad, the beginning of the last season, rather, has a cold opening of like Walter White 2 years later. He has a beard, and he meets with this weapons dealer, and he opens up the trunk of a car, and there is a machine gun in the back of the car. Vince Gilligan and company, when they were writing that episode, they had no clue what that machine gun was for. Oh. And they didn't decide that until later into writing the season. Oh. So it's really interesting, like, just how that, like, you have a general sense of how it's going to end, but you don't really know how you're going to get there. And if you make that end point way too strict, that kind of puts you in a corner.
Yeah, because the plane thing sucked. That was bad.
Yeah.
That was sort of the only thing. That is a perfect show, and then that was the word. That was bad. And that's it. I can't think of anything else.
It looked cartoony, like the CGI especially. It was hard to believe.
So dumb, and it's like not. It's barely. It's like not even like a. It wasn't even relate. Like it wasn't. Like the playtest doesn't matter. Like it does. Like the fact that it happened means nothing. Like it doesn't mean anything for anybody.
Likewise, to tie it back to the MCU, that very first post-credit scene in Iron Man 1, they put Nick Fury in there as like hey, it might be cool if we use him later. We don't know what we're gonna do, but hey, let's just put Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury in there. When, like, Avengers 1 is, like, far, far away from being greenlit. They were just like, hey, this might be a cool thing. And then, lo and behold, look at us now. Like, Iron Man 1 was not made the same way, like, The Mummy or Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them were. Like, where those movies are clearly trying to set up a universe. Like, Iron Man 1 was just a straight-up movie-ass movie.
Mm-hmm. That's true, and that's just like.
And they accidentally made a cool series after that.
Yeah, that's just like the first episode of season 5. It's like you give yourself like a little bit.
Yeah.
But you gotta. I think a problem, and this is like, I will relate this back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But like the fact that like shows like Netflix shows don't have to be a certain length. And that you don't have to have like The Fly, which is like a lot of every TV show has the phenomenon of like these like ran out of money, and then they do like these
wow episodes.
Yeah, yes, that's what they're called. It's like I think limitations make better stuff. Like I was also watching some interview. It's the one on Netflix where Jerry Seinfeld and David Letterman talk, and David Letterman talked about like his style came from the fact that the network had all these really weird rules, and he wanted to do inappropriate stuff. And so he like came up with this style that is like so weird that it was just as he was just as satisfied. But the only reason he would have done it was because he couldn't do like raunchy stuff. And so so like I guess the solution nowadays with stuff like Netflix where you don't have like a limited episode length and you don't have restrictions on rating systems is that like something like Breaking Bad, which was a network show, but that doesn't matter. The point is like they gave themselves a little bit of a rule that they have to end a certain way. And so like maybe Iron Man you can like relate that to it where like they gave like a little bit. So like you have to restrict yourself a little bit and not enough that you have to make the planes collide for no reason.
Absolutely. And I think that the relationship between studio and director can have that mutually bolstering effect where the studio brings some limitations to the table and then lets the creative play within those rules and come up with something great. And the creative gets sort of a challenge that they can overcome. I think that relationship can exist in like this balance.
Yeah, because like unlimited money and time like usually makes bad movies. Yeah. And that's like that was like big of me to say. There were like a lot of tentpole movies in the 80s, like what's the one like at Heaven's Gate? Was like there were like a lot of movies that like where people get unlimited. Like even like Stanley Kubrick, everyone speaks about him like he did everything he wanted all the time. But he like admits that he had to make stuff on the fly and like I don't know, like there's something to having having boundaries that like makes creativity flow. Yeah. So like the producer-director relationship is about establishing boundaries that don't make it like your movie has to be under 2 hours and it becomes an hour 59, but it doesn't give you like you don't go all over the place. I guess
I sat through all of Barry Lyndon, man. That freaking movie.
Oh, I never saw that. And you know what? That's another movie I'll never see. Okay.
It's so long. It's like, oh, cool. He lit some of the scenes with candles. It's like, great, good for you, Kubrick.
Some of those, too long. Like, he should have been given more. That was like later in his career or earlier. I don't remember.
That was pretty. It was somewhere in the later half, like
maybe that's when they gave
pre Wise Eyed Shut, but like around The Shining, I think. I don't know, maybe before The Shining.
Okay.
Would we like to move on to some failings that we could potentially also learn from?
Failings.
Well, that's the the fact that Edgar Wright couldn't make a movie,
right?
And he everything he touches is incredible, and he's the best. So.
Yeah. There are certain types of genuinely good movies that are not allowed by the restrictions.
Yeah, and I would have really liked to have seen a movie that Edgar Wright directed that was like Ant-Man is written because since he wrote it, it's like written to be like an Edgar Wright movie.
Yeah.
And what an opportunity, like, before, like, if you told Edgar Wright, like, about the concept of people who can shrink and then fight and then, like, they can make little objects become big and big objects become little.
Yeah.
Like, that's like a big part of his comedy is, like, yeah, just that physicality, like, the physical opportunity would be so good for him. I'm trying to think of an example in, like, a live action. It's like shrinking. I don't know. That's not the point. But, like, yeah, just the fact that it's so physical and so visual, like, he could have made something so sick, but it didn't fit with the producer boundaries.
Even though we've, like, faulted things like The Mummy and Fantastic Beasts and Justice League for too much world building, I think Iron Man 2 was very much the first MCU movie that was criticized for that.
Yeah.
It was a very strange movie because Samuel Jackson would just show up as Nick Fury in the middle of the movie, and you're expected to just know who Nick Fury is. Whereas if you're a casual moviegoer and you missed that post-credits scene, you will have no clue why the hell Samuel Jackson has an eye patch and is in this movie in the middle all of a sudden. And it just kind of added to... There was already a lot of chaos in that story. So... I don't know. It's really interesting listening to these behind-the-scenes qualms that people had. Like, it sounded like Joss Whedon did not have a good time making Age of Ultron. Because he was given, like, restrictions and ultimatums. Like, he had already shot the film, and he, brought it up to them, and the studio was like, okay, we don't like Hawkeye's farm, and we don't like Thor's vision quest in the cave. You have to shorten one of those. So it's like... So I can imagine, yeah, Whedon, if both of those were, like, kind of, like, things he's attached to have to kill his darlings is, like, a really frustrating thing. So, like, even though we kind of champion the studio-director relationship, that doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect. I mean, the fact that, I think a lot of it has to do with the space, like, Thomas, you guys are talking about the corners of the MCU, so James Gunn would probably have a lot of room to do cosmic and space stuff because that has been untouched by the MCU, whereas, like, maybe Edgar Wright doing more, like, Earth-based stuff would have more restrictions and be like, oh, you have to tie this in with S.H.I.E.L.D., you have to tie this in with Tony Stark, some yada, 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 yada. So... It's really impossible to find a consistency of this because it really sounds like it's a case-by-case basis. And, like, Marvel's always learning stuff, so they're always changing their philosophy. So it's really hard to kind of, like, pin down particular faults because, they all happen at different times. They're doing different things all the time. It's a hard question to answer, although I can imagine, like, a lot of people... Like, some people just don't like superheroes, and that's fair. And are tired of, like, so many of these in the movies. So, if you get a casual moviegoer to try to watch Civil War, like, they're not going to give a crap about the airport fight scene. Because they don't have any investment on any of these people, because they don't care about these movies. So, I think it was Marcus and McFeely, the screenwriters of... the Cap movies and Infinity War and the sequel, they were like, okay, yeah, by Civil War, we're not going to do previously on the MCU. You have to actually watch all these movies to get caught up. Like, if you are not with us already, you're not going to follow this at all. So that is the fact that the screenwriters of the movie said that probably represents something, like, probably represents maybe not a fault, but, like, an asterisk,
Yeah. Asterisk's a better word. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, and that problem only gets worse. Like, the longer your successful series goes, like, the harder it is for new people to break into it. Like, even people who are into it get fatigued with the same concept. So I think that is, like, a good lesson is just, like, you need a wider range, and less connected might be better. Like, these massive crossover movies are, like, the biggest strain on the movie-going audience's ability to like understand what's going on, and the creative people's to fit within all of the constraints.
I think I disagree with you.
Okay.
So the counterpoint is that I didn't see Dark World, I didn't see Ant-Man, I saw half of Civil War, I didn't see Winter Soldier, and let me think of another one. I think that was all the ones I didn't see. I didn't see Iron Man 3, or maybe I did. I don't know. I didn't see 2.
Fiery People? Does it ring a bell?
I remember he like got rid of all his suits. Was that 3?
That was 3.
That was 3.
Okay, so then I saw 3. But like me, I like it doesn't. There's like a half fan. I'm like a half fan. I'm like a 2/3 fan. But I like Infinity War was so awesome. Like I thought it was so sick, and I didn't think I was missing out, and like I didn't feel alienated. There's like you kind of like I get used like. Ant-Man wasn't in it, so I guess that didn't bother me. But yeah, so it was like okay, like there is like it's not that much of an exclusive club. I think they're trying. Yeah. They don't do like I don't think they were thinking. Okay, now that everyone's on board, let's make like if you're in the club, if you've seen the movies, then you can handle this movie. But I guess the maybe it's a more reasonable like okay, well we're not gonna do previously on. Like we're gonna assume you have an idea of what's going on. But I think they're pretty like I've been able to go in and out, watch stuff later that's from before, and like you can be a casual Marvel person, I would say.
Yeah, I think ironically Infinity War did a better job catching people up than Civil War did, despite Infinity War having way more people. Part of it is because Thanos is such a distinct antagonist that, like, scene number 1, okay, that's the bad guy. He wants to get these things, and everyone else has to stop him. That is really easy to figure out and follow. Whereas Civil War, it's like, these are all pre-established characters, they make passing remarks to things that have happened in previous movies, and they are all fighting each other for reasons that I don't understand the nuances of because I have not seen the previous movies.
Yes, that's true.
And that's a big deal is I think in Infinity War you introduce groups of characters to each other, and there has to be a little bit of catch up for them. Yeah. Like, we're the Guardians, he's a tree, he hates that. You know, like you need to have that so that Tony Stark understands, but that means your audience understands too. Civil War, everyone kind of knew each other already.
Yeah, that's a good. I bet they did. That was like somebody must have.
Oh yeah.
Thought that up. Like thought that a good idea. Like, oh, this is sick because. Yeah, it doesn't slow down. It's not previously on, but it is.
Which speaks to, I think, how important it is to keep introducing new elements and keep mixing up the universe. Like, not because you're trying to add complexity, but actually because you're trying to reduce it. I think that as different from like a TV show, like it's very hard to jump into a TV show in like season 5. Because for the most part, it's the same set of characters that have been going along, and like they've had hours and hours of adventures that you haven't seen, and they like all know about it. Whereas in movies, when you bring in new characters or have new adventures or like meet new antagonists, like you require a little bit of a reset. Like you need to be like, here are things. This person changes things, so now they're different, and you're caught up. You know. At the same time, like, the problem does get hard when you introduce everybody to each other like they did in Infinity War. Like, now the Guardians know the Avengers, know Wakanda, know... they're all mixed together now, and you have to keep adding new things and keep changing things up. And with their reluctance to kill off characters, it does balloon. What do you got, Chris?
That is the problem with comic books. That is why I cannot read comic books, because they have been going on for decades and decades and decades. And that they have that problem that you just described, Thomas, but like exponentially worse. And the way comic books try to solve that problem is by rebooting and retconning like every few years. And it gets to the point where it is absolutely impossible to follow. I have no clue what is happening in any of the DC or Marvel comics right now, because they will restart the universe, they will retcon things, and you have to like do a lot of research if you want to like stay current. It's really impossible unless it's like a new character. So like I can probably pick up like Miles Morales or like Kamala Khan now, but if I wanted to know like what Peter Parker and Carol Danvers are doing right now, I'd be like, what is happening? Like, what are they? And that's why I hope the MCU stays grounded and doesn't I hope they don't do like their Crisis on Infinite Earths thing. I hope they don't do. I hope if it comes to a point where like every 10 years there is an Infinity War event to restart the entire universe and the timeline. I mean, that could work because like movie reboots, it can get new audiences, but it would just be confusing, man. That's just my thought on that. Comic books are bad.
I hope they take the perspective of allowing, and I think they are. This is my theory for Infinity War, so potential spoilers for Infinity War Untitled. But my theory is that the old OG Avengers are gonna die and stay dead, and that they'll bring back the characters who were snapped away, and those are mostly new characters on the younger side. They're the next generation, and then in a few years, those characters will give way to the new generation and so forth. So you sort of have a stable number of like 12 superheroes at any given time with some oscillation.
So that's what I want them to do.
Yes.
You would have to have a lot of faith in Disney though.
I would.
Because I feel like most other studios would be like, "Oh no, this is not going to work. We need Tony Stark. So if we can't keep Robert Downey Jr. on, we're just going to recast Tony Stark." Rather than like, well, we need Steve Rogers, we're going to recast, instead of making Sam Wilson or making Bucky Barnes the new Captain America, they would recast Steve Rogers. That's how Sony has done Spider-Man. And that's why, like, it will be the equivalent of, like, say Sony made the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and then they made, say, a Spider-Man 4 or 5, where Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man dies, or something like that. And then the next movie will be a Miles Morales movie, and Miles Morales is now Spider-Man. Sony would never do that because they believe in Peter Parker too much. So it really depends on, like, if Disney is confident, if Marvel wanted to take the legacy route and have new characters replace the old ones rather than just, like, James Bonding it up.
We're a little off topic, but I will say that I think that Kevin Feige is the bulwark against the Disney greed. I think that I
hope so.
I think that he is the only guy standing in between them recasting characters and keeping them on forever. I think he's the person saying like, no, the right move is to, we have Black Panther. We're going to continue making $1 billion a year. Don't worry. Like, we can let go of some of these characters that like we've done everything we can with.
I'd like that.
No, but this is I think you guys are. This is like James Bond. It's like every James Bond incarnation was like has a different style, and it's like a different like way to be James Bond. And they're in a little bit of a rut because Daniel Craig's been doing it for a long time, and it's like they can't go back to like campy, I guess. But I would be excited at the idea of giving the Superman origin story to somebody new and like doing it in a different way and seeing it again, because we've seen it I thought the appeal of comic books in general was that you could pick up like a series and we like know Batman's story a little bit, but then it's like people put it into like a new style and like
oh totally.
So like rebooting sounds bad, but I don't think it is. Like I don't think it's inherently a bad I think it would be sick that in like if in 10 years we did like a Tony Stark as like I don't know, like a part of his life we haven't seen yet or something, like him, I don't know, we've got all this cultural baggage with these characters, and I think it's like a fun way to play with what we know about them by like doing them in a way that's different but already like stuff we already know.
In our Corners of the MCU episode, Anthony was really harping on the idea of like a what if movie, like just not related to the continuity, but it is like what if one of Tony Stark's like major creations blew up and destroyed his workshop or something, and like you get to have that character with all of the familiarity you have with them, while knowing that this is not going to feed into the next movie. Just like
I like that, but I don't think they would ever make that into an actual theatrical movie. Maybe like a short film or a streaming TV show. But when you start releasing alternate reality movies, that's gonna get confusing to the general consumer.
yeah. We're closing in on the 1 hour mark on the recording, so let's transition into our like central thematic question, which is non-action blockbuster movies, just like movies that are not in the action genre, movies that might not be as big, but still want to capture this wide audience, still want to have this sort of like general appeal to people. What of these things that we've talked about can they learn and adapt and use? How do movies
From the
look
MCU?
like? From like learn from the MCU, but like play it forward into very different contexts.
I think that there's nothing to learn because you won't because if we've noticed I'm glad I get an opportunity to say this, but if you've like looked at what we've talked about today, it has nothing to do with filmmaking at all. This has been a production discussion. There's no filmmaking in here. It's like who casts who, schedules, constraints, like the creative process, but never about like very rarely have we mentioned like I don't know, like this story or this, like we have mentioned character, but more character in the context of a production environment as opposed to like a director and like, you know what, like David, does that is that true? Like, do people,
Yeah,
does
absolutely.
that make sense?
I get what you mean.
So
yeah.
like for a movie to think like when someone's trying to make a movie, like Greta Gerwig's trying to make Lady Bird, there is nothing that the MC universe can help her with at all.
The Lady Bird cinematic universe.
Yeah, like if you're not trying to make a cinematic universe, then you shouldn't, like there's no takeaway. But if you are trying to make a cinematic universe, like no, Lady Bird could not take any advice from it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Lady Bird. I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, but that would, not to be like that in a way kind of discredits the topic of lessons from the superhero.
Sure.
I guess it is more about, it's like if you are an action movie or like, like trying to take like Godzilla and King Kong and put them together, like that movie, it's like MCU, take notes, like everything, you can take everything from it. Notice the trade-off, which is that, there's like, it's production first, directing second, so Edgar Wright can't do well necessarily, and then all the benefits are like, yeah, you gotta treat it like a barbecue and not like an assembly line, I guess, are
Sure.
the things I would say.
I mean, don't you think that there's still something, even if you are a studio that like is going to finance an indie movie called Lady Bird, do you not like take note that you can still sort of have some goals for what that's going to be, make those goals like up front and let the creative like run with it, that comedy, especially self-aware comedy, especially like genre specific comedy, like being aware of the tropes and stuff like that, is highly very popular, and like does not mean that you can't tell the story that you want. It's just sort of a mindset.
I mean, if using comedy as an example, I mean, sorry, I keep using Lady Bird as our
that's apparently the vehicle for the conversation now.
Yeah, sure, but like Thor Ragnarok and Lady Bird both have a lot of humor, but they both use humor in very different context and for very different purposes. Lady Bird, because like it's realistic, it's relatable. We've kind of experienced the same thing like Saoirse Ronan has kind of experienced in Lady Bird. Whereas Thor Ragnarok, it's like, again, it's a Big Trouble in Little China homage. It's like, what's Thor gonna do next kind of thing, like it's yeah, I get the question, but I cannot think of a single thing that like, I don't think there's anything, like Paul Thomas Anderson or David Lynch would like want to take from the MCU, because they're very big picture, and not to say that I think the MCU has had very excellent filmmakers, but not a lot of them are like auteurs. None of them are very distinct individual voices the same way, like, like I said, P.T. Anderson, David Lynch, and Greta Gerwig. When you listen to the commentary for MCU movies, they're always inspired by other movies. Whereas, like, when you watch a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, like, maybe there's some, like, Robert Altman vibes, but it's very, like, oh, this is, like, something that only Paul Thomas Anderson can do. This is something that only Quentin Tarantino can do. So everyone has their influences, but I feel like, there isn't really as much room in the MCU to, I feel like I'm veering away from the topic. Am I making sense here? Okay, yeah.
No, yeah.
It's...
It does sound like a lot of the more independent original creative works sort of like are pioneering new ideas and new techniques and stuff like that. And then larger franchises get to sit back and say, oh, that was good. Yeah. Like, that went well. I liked that. Like, pull that in. I didn't like the rest of it, though, so we're going to leave that. And so, like, the experimentation goes on in these more, like, independent films. And then these franchises just get to reap the benefits.
It's the other way around. It's the MCU learning from those movies. Because that is why Kevin Feige hires a lot of independent directors. Like, people like, like just coming out of Sundance Film Festival. Like, people who have made low-budget movies and maybe who have ambitions for, like, larger blockbuster movies. So, like, Fleck and Bowden are making Captain Marvel, and, like, I've seen, I've only seen one movie of theirs. It was Half Nelson, and, very low budget, Ryan Gosling movie, and, if I were to show you Half Nelson, you would neither of us would be able to explain why they're making Captain Marvel right now. But, where the hell was I going with that? Basically, I'm trying to say that, like, they are, like, the MCU in making like, individual movies. They are trying to learn from other films outside of the cinematic universe model, while also trying to make those distinct movies palatable to their larger universe. Whereas it doesn't really work the other way around, because it sounds like, Thomas, you're asking what can one independent movie learn from a larger set of movies, where, like, I would concede, like, maybe any movie, no matter who made it, can learn, like, how to do action from The Winter Soldier, or how to do comedy from Thor Ragnarok. But, you can't make a Sundance Film Festival movie and be like, what can I learn from the MCU and Kevin Feige as a whole?
Fair. There's one note that we didn't get to earlier that I'm gonna, like, pull out as, like, my last ditch defense of this premise.
Okay. I don't mean to, like, shit all over your entire thesis. I'm just like
no, and this is gonna be interesting, because this is gonna be, I think, the only episode where, like, the central, like, question is just the answer is no.
But that is a thesis.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, he's saying that there is no similarity is like saying something, because that requires you to say, okay, well then how are they different? So it's not in vain, but it's just. And
and to be fair, like, I'm saying you are right. I'm just saying switch them.
Yeah, which is interesting in and of itself. The only thing I will say is that what made me think about this was thinking about, like, the moment that you have when you watch these movies, and it's very difficult to describe, but it's just the fuck yes moment, where you are just gripped with this, like, excitement and carried away by how, like, amazing what you're watching on screen is. And you can, like, go to a bad movie in the superhero, like, fiction and, like, still get that moment at one point or another. And I think what that is it's about wish fulfillment, and it's about, like, the escapism that comes from a story where what you wish could happen in real life is played out, so you get to vicariously experience that. And I think that the whole concept of superheroes is deeply tied into this, like, I wish I could fly, I wish I could throw a car, like, I wish that I could fly to Afghanistan and kill all the terrorists and no one else, and make it home by dinner, right? Like that feeling of like getting to see your fantasies like recreated on screen and getting that catharsis is a huge part, in my opinion, of why people go to see movies. Like the general public, like most folks, like want to see this amazing thing that could never happen in real life, like play out on screen. And I think that in a lot of cases of independent movies, there is this sort of obsession with being a little bit like darker now, being a little bit more like gritty and realistic and showing like the dark side of things. And I totally like understand where that drive comes from. But I think that alienates a lot of people who are coming to movies for hope, for a feeling of enjoyment and being able to step out of the constraints of reality. And I think that that's something that movies can keep in mind, is like, oh yeah, like lighthearted, enjoyable, like wish fulfillment escapism is still, one, compatible with a lot of different types of stories, and two, like still very much at the core of major entertainment.
What kind of movies do you have in mind when you were thinking about that? Because you're kind of making it sound like Cormac McCarthy is writing every single indie movie right now.
No, I mean, it's obviously not all, and probably not most, but there's just a lot of like, I don't know. I went to go see like The Shape of Water, and there was some like nice parts of that movie, but I felt like it really dragged you through the mud, in that there were so many bad things that happened over the course of the thing, and you get this moment at the very end where like water magic happens, and it's sort of intended to be like a happily ever after with them in the river and that kind of stuff. I didn't have like a fuck yeah moment in that instance, because I feel like that was not the conflict that I was invested in.
Okay, yeah.
I'm
trying to stop myself from going on a 3-hour rant about Guillermo del Toro movies and how he writes monsters. But okay, I see your point.
Do you watch the video about monsters? The Captain Christian video?
I will cue that up now, because
that is literally, you're going to die. That is the best video ever. If that's a thing that you care.
Right, we're linking that in the episode description.
Yeah, I guess I wonder if Guillermo del Toro there's no the payoff is not that as exciting as a superhero movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, just part of me, and like, part of me is just like, I feel like independent, like it's just too broad of a thing to say.
Sure.
I mean, I can't think of an independent movie right now that has like the sickest payoff, but they're just smaller. It's just like a smaller movie, so the payoff can never be huge. Like, there's no like explosion or final victory.
No, but you could win one up on your social rival, or make a dramatic wedding proposal at the end of a rom-com or something like that.
I wonder if like in the independent environment, that's like cheesy. Like Lady Bird has like such a cute ending that is like a good payoff, I think. But yeah, it isn't like a big payoff. No. But I don't think a big payoff would have suited Lady Bird at all.
Sure, and it's not appropriate for.
So but this is like, I mean, we have to be so careful, because literally like we're saying like advice to movies that aren't franchises. It's like what, like that's like almost every movie. Yeah, that aren't blockbusters. And like, but the big. I'm trying to think of like a huge payoff that's in an indie movie. But I guess indie, it just doesn't. I don't know if indie is the right world to have big payoffs. I guess in the 80s, like every movie had a big payoff, but those are all blockbuster movies.
I think that the idea of a storybook happy ending is considered like dated.
Yeah, it's no longer like, I don't know. Well, it was like, this is like a tangent, but like movie trends, to generalize American cinema, it's like the golden age, everything was a big payoff, and then at the end of production code, they decided everything was gritty from the 60s and 70s. The 80s reinvigorated blockbuster, and then 90s was like a tent pole and the failure of tent pole, and then it was like the recording at home, like digital age where anybody can record anything, and so now I don't know what era we're in. We're in the franchise era, like universe era.
Super franchise.
The super franchise era. So I don't know what to make of.
So post franchise era, assuming that this trend is just another phase of cinema, which I think we would all hope for. We would all hope that even if we love these, like, we want the way people make movies to keep evolving. What is the legacy of this era? Like, what is the takeaway from franchises as like we go into the next trend?
Yeah, maybe that's like that's like the question rephrased in a way that's less like production versus auteur or whatever. What would be the legacy, like when like these universes get tired? Yeah, I guess you're right. Like there would be like people would have to get epic and escapist in movies with lower budgets. If franchises like this, these universes were like banned. How would independent creators facilitate
Fill
that inherent need?
Exactly.
And I don't know. I guess there would be. I don't know.
I lived through the cinematic universe prohibition.
Yeah.
I think some of the main points are because we talked a lot about the push and pull between studios and filmmakers, and it has fluctuated with Marvel a lot, but I think there have been several cases where you find where they were able to coexist pretty well. So, like, the Taika example, for example, like, that is probably, like, a landmark prime example of, like, how you can balance between having a commercial film and a passion project. So, I think that's definitely one thing to keep in mind moving forward. One thing we haven't really talked about, and that, because this is not really what the episode is about, but I think one secret to success that has made Marvel more successful than the Dark Universe is the plan is to emulate long-form storytelling from other mediums. So emulating, television in a way, but mostly comic books. You're making comic book movies. Whereas if you look at the way WB is handling Harry Potter right now, the Wizarding World, let's call it, their solution is, we have to make more movies, and that's it. Like, we have to, like, Marvel is getting, like, different franchises from different, like, as you said in that episode, corners of the universe, hiring specific people for each of those corners and making an own unique thing that all fit together. Whereas, like, if you watch Crimes for Grindelwald, it's literally the same names who made the old Harry Potter movies, just stretching it out as long as possible to make more money. So it's good that we have successful and not successful examples.
I mean, wouldn't you say, though, that they're
legacy,
trying to emulate the success of a book series? Their thing is not comic books, but their thing is, this book series did well, let's match the tempo.
Let's make another series. Bad idea. And if you're gonna make a different series, get a different author and not the same author.
Yeah. It could have been good.
Oh yeah, I saw the potential in the first one. I don't know.
Okay, the first Fantastic Beasts.
We have to save this for an off-topic, Chris.
I know. Well, let me just say this really quickly. But the way people who hate the MCU, the way they feel about watching something like Civil War or Infinity War, that's how I felt watching the first Fantastic Beasts. Because I was like, wait, there is no beginning or end to the movie. It is just the middle of a movie that is just setting up 4 more movies.
Right.
So whenever I hear people say that about the MCU, I'm like, oh, you're crazy. But, like, I felt that way while watching Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I am actually a Harry Potter fan.
My first words after watching The Crimes of Grindelwald, like the credits came up, was, that was not a movie. It was not, like, it was never intended to be its own story. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, is that there's a balance not just between sort of the creative constraints and the creative people working on it, but there is a balance between connection and like independency. And like you need to make sure that each installment is its own story. And like real life works like that. It's not like that hard to emulate. Like every day is its own day where you woke up and you did stuff and you went to bed, and it's like contained. It's just like really important not to set your story like until the afternoon.
It's like this is like Breaking Bad. This is what Breaking Bad does.
Yeah. You need
like
good
every
episodes.
episode has its own beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
Hey, can I talk about Better Call Saul for 2 hours now? Because I love that show.
Maybe not that long, but
My dude, you gotta finish Better Call Saul. I mean, it's not over yet, but like,
is it as good? How does it compare to Breaking Bad?
it is very good, and it has the same visual language, but it is very good in a totally separate and unique way, and I love it.
Nice.
It's the first 3 seasons are on Netflix. Okay. Better Call Saul.
That's like
Chris is
that's
starting
like
to
the
break
Breaking
down.
Bad universe.
Yeah.
That's like a universe.
yeah, it is.
They're making a movie. They're making a movie about Jesse Pinkman.
And it's gonna be awesome.
So we did. Is it okay if I tangent into the class, Chris?
Is the what?
Into the Stuco.
Oh yeah.
So Chris created a class at Carnegie Mellon, basically to talk about like this stuff, and I was late. I was the third teacher to teach the class, and like that's who like does this. And
you were a student in the first class.
What do you mean a class?
So Carnegie
he's a
Mellon
teacher.
has like a
signed up.
program where you can make like, so say like a regular class at CMU is 9 units. Basically, this would allow students to make an official 3-unit class. So the teachers, the quote unquote teacher will get credit, and the students will get credit. So I literally made a curriculum where I taught other students about something. So you have like a class on sneakers, you have a class on Doctor Who, a class on Star Wars, a class on knitting, a class on programming.
There were also classes on like Java and like Android development.
Yeah.
taught
Very
by
cool.
students and
What a
stuff
cool
like that.
idea.
Yeah. So the
You took his
only
class?
what
You took his class?
I took his class and then I taught his class.
Did you get an A?
Yes. Well, I got a passing.
Pass
which
fail.
is-
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
But the only like major assignment we've had in that class is to present on another universe.
Just some other like intellectual property that does like interconnected, but not a series. And I'm excited. I don't think anyone's done Breaking Bad, but like that's an extremely valid topic for one of those presentations now. Yeah, no, that's some interesting stuff, because over the course of time you get like to see that there are like a lot of different ways of doing continuity.
Yeah. Because there was like I saw, what's the one about money laundering? The Netflix show?
Is that Ozark or?
Ozark, yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot like Breaking Bad, but it doesn't do that episodic thing. It just kind of keeps going. It's a big 10-hour movie.
I'm too spoiled by Better Call Saul to even try Ozark.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Don't bother. Just keep watching that. Because, man, Vince Gilligan's he's an American treasure. Because he, like, the two pinnacle American genres are the Western and the gangster. And those are just so American.
Yeah.
And, but they obviously, this is, like, not related at all, but they, like, obviously take from the Italians and the French or whatever. But the fact that Vince Gilligan has harnessed the Western by making his stuff in the desert and then gangster because it's like crime.
Right.
What a guy. And just very exciting, very great guy. Very impressive.
So is it time for my Fast and Furious rant?
Yeah,
I think it might be time for closing remarks, actually, Chris.
Can you tie it to the topic? Because that would make you...
Here's the thing. I know the general idea of where my rant will end, but I don't know what will happen in the middle.
Oh, perfect.
Just
Some
like
constraints that we can-
Breaking Bad and the
very
MCU.
good, very good. Amazing.
If you are interested in a Fast and Furious rant, I highly recommend Patrick H. Williams' Why Fast and Furious is Great.
Oh
or
yeah, I
whatever his
love
thing
that
is.
guy's videos.
That's my go-to to like try and explain to people why it's not awful.
Right. Well, here's my take on how it's awful, because this will probably relate to what we just talked about.
Okay, we're gonna do
we'll
it.
See if we'll see if I can relate to it.
Okay,
So
all right.
say it.
Let's flash back to 2001.
Holy moly!
Okay, no, well, that's when the first The Fast and the Furious came out, and it was just like this kind of like niche, car culture, movie. And, you know, it was just like these dudes stealing VCRs, and there were street races and like pretty scantily clad women and stuff like that. Then you get to like, okay, we have to make a sequel because this movie found an audience, maybe not a mainstream audience, but it found an audience regardless. And they made Too Fast, Too Furious. It was a stupid movie. Then they made Tokyo Drift, which was borderline like direct-to-DVD schlock. Like the name The Fast and the Furious really didn't mean anything by that point except just a brand name. And when you look at those first three movies, they had very little to do with each other, and they had like different casts of characters. So, Tokyo Drift was directed by Justin Lin, who is a director I admire very much. He did the fourth movie, which was just called Fast and Furious. And they brought in the old cast from the first movie back, while also like making references to like Tokyo Drift. Decent movie, kind of middling. Then you make Fast 5, the fifth Fast and Furious movie, also by Justin Lin. So what Fast 5 did was it took all the characters from The Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious, Tokyo Drift, and the fourth Fast and Furious movie, and they added Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and they repurposed this weird street car racing underground culture thing into an international heists, Ocean's trilogy kind of thing. And they took these weird, disparate characters from all these different movies and combined them all together. And they accidentally made an amazing ensemble cast. Completely unintentionally. And then Vin Diesel, being very involved in his own movies, he hones in on, and people make fun of this, but like it's really a thing that works. He's like, okay, Fast and Furious is about family. Like, these are all guys like who drive cars really fast, but in the end, they are a family. So when you watch the later half of the Fast and Furious movies, they keep saying the word family, 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 family over and over again. So they accidentally turned Fast and Furious from a niche film into a superhero-like film franchise with a large cast of characters, an expanding universe, and a very simple theme that's easy to relate to, the theme of family. And I gotta say, like, the action, because, like, these movies are getting, like, bigger budgets, they are just looking better and better with each iteration. And I am shocked of, like, how, even though, like, the first three movies are unweighted, how they have somehow, like, paid attention to the continuity of the Fast and Furious franchise to make a consistent, like, crazy franchise that actually makes sense story-wise and plot-wise. I mean, it doesn't, like, the actual plot is absurd, but the fact that they keep making obscure callbacks to their own history and have, like, created their own lore, I think is this really astounding accidental achievement, because there's no way anyone was planning to do this. What I'm saying is that the Fast and Furious franchise was the MCU before the MCU was the MCU. And that's my spiel on that.
Very good. That was good. Well, the relation is that this is not a feat. That was not a feat of filmmaking, but a feat of production.
Yeah.
Which is how it's like the MCU.
Yeah, you can say like the story element of, like, you know, family is like kind of the but you know that can also be like a focus group buzzword kind of thing, you know, depending on how you look at it.
I will say the other similarity is that the different creative people who worked on each movie create like very different styles that all like the continuity is congruent, like the characters are like track all the way through, but like you get very different takes on car racing through like the various franchise, like including like the first, maybe not the first movie, but like there was a period of time in the middle where like the camera zooming down into the engine during the race was like a big thing, and like, you know, later on you just get like Vin Diesel driving a VW Bug in Cuba while it is on fire. Like it's
you can see the same progression with the Mission Impossible franchise because it has been around.
They're
a
very
little longer
similar
than
in my
Fast and
mind.
Furious.
Yeah, they make these movies like all international because that's where all the money's at.
Yeah,
Like I think Fast and Furious is like the way like China and I guess Europe, I don't know, but I know China specifically. Like they see it's like an American movie.
Yeah.
It's like very American. But they like go to China in the movie and they have like a Chinese actor. I haven't seen them, but I think that's what they do. Like a lot of these international they like, have like a China segment usually. And then
Iron Man 3 did that.
Oh, it did.
Did Mission
They had a scene that was exclusive to Chinese audiences where a Chinese heart surgeon was the one who got the shrapnel out of his heart.
Oh, that's funny. So it's like recut to China. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think either Fast and Furious or Mission Impossible has like a China scene.
They don't?
I don't think so.
I mean,
I'd have to look back, but like, Transformers absolutely has done that.
Transformers has done that a lot, but
Meg did that. Someone
no way.
Yeah, they did like there's like a Chinese character in it or something. I mean, yeah, it's just like I don't know. I don't know what movies they make in China, but far and away, like America can make like the best movies. Like
there are a lot of people in China, so that's definitely why it's such a huge audience.
Yeah. But yeah, Hollywood has always crushed other... I don't know. No, this is like a big assumption. I don't know how much money Bollywood movies have. But Bollywood has like an issue of... Their movies are all kind of the same. They're all like musicals.
They make so many.
And they make so many. But yeah, we make like the best... not to be American.
We make the best movies. We have the best filmmakers.
The best blockbusters. Like the best blockbuster tools, I guess. Like the most money and I don't know, but yeah, that was a big generalization, which was tricky to do. But I think
you nailed it. Yeah,
I think it's
stuck the landing.
There's something there.
Well, I'm done with that. If you wanted to actually end this now, Thomas.
Yes, yeah, I think that might be. We've been here for over 2 hours, so I feel like that's fair for a 1 hour podcast episode.
Fair enough.
Closing remarks, Jack. What are you walking out of here with new knowledge?
Well, I mean, so I approached to like Marvel, talking about Marvel. I used to, I guess before this I thought was like, I don't know, like such a fanboy, like lame thing to do. Like I don't know, I'm like sick of hearing people's opinion. Like I thought I was sick of hearing MCU opinions. They're just like everyone has them, and like, but this is like I like how you guys like that you mentioned Breaking Bad, and that like the redeeming stuff of Fast and Furious. Like these are good, new, fresh ways to talk about the MCU. Because I'm sure you guys have done a podcast on this, but like talking about villains in the MCU or something. I don't know. It's like very like everyone talks about it. It's like. Everyone like understands like, oh, is Thanos like crafting the perfect villain? Is Thanos like a good villain? Like, and it's like, and it's just like I'm like very jaded. But this is very fresh. You guys are very sharp and said stuff I didn't think you were gonna say, and it made me think a little differently that like Marvel stuff can be stuff I haven't heard. I would say. So that's my closing remark. It was good.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
I think all of us here at AP Marvel very much appreciate that, and that's what we strive for. So
yeah, I am also jaded. That is why I made this podcast.
Right, good. Yeah,
not to diss, because like I am friends with many of the people who do talk about that stuff. Like I'm not dissing them. I'm just saying like I want to create a different space.
Yeah, the yes, and I see it. I'm impressed with because you've got to Marvel, like when people treat Marvel like it's like, or like the phenomenon of like Marvel versus DC is like such a bubble
Yeah.
And it's like so Justice League, Breaking Bad, comparing their production to MCU is great stuff, very good stuff. If it's new, I never heard that either one, so I like it. That's just good. Anyway, I'll stop saying that. But that was my takeaway. That was my closer.
I'll take all the praise I can get. Thank you so much.
Chris, what do you got? What did you get out of today?
That I still love Fast and Furious. I was actually watching the 8th movie last night.
Oh no!
Before it was 4 a.m. and I was like, wait, I should go to sleep.
It sounds like before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fitting that I watched both Watchmen and Fate of the Furious yesterday. to
Surprisingly good research for this episode.
Accidental
Yeah,
research. Yeah. But yeah, no, thanks for introducing all of these ideas and concepts. I think this is, I don't know if this was your intention, but this is kind of a nice summary of how the MCU is, maybe not how, but why it has worked and why others have not worked. So yeah, maybe I don't want to, I hope it doesn't sound like I was, kind of poking too many holes in your thesis statement, but like,
no, I mean, that's
I think this really
for.
was like a good, discussion on like, what can we learn? Like, what can we learn in the future? I'm glad this wasn't or is Marvel doomed and stuff like that, because I've had enough of those. And yeah, those are pretty much my final thoughts. Watch Better Call Saul. That's my other thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I think that I really enjoyed the way that we talked through the process, and there I mean that is like part of the criticism of the thesis, but also part of the joy of the episode is that you get behind the camera, you get like into the creative people who work on the films and say like, how are they doing things and how is that different than how it's been done before? And I think that even though we sort of talked about how a lot of movies that are non-franchise related, non-blockbuster related are experimenting and doing new things and trying new things out and don't have a lot to gain, that this process does interact strongly with those movies and draw from them, and that in certain contexts these lessons, like these processes that Marvel has invented, are valuable to look at and examine, and they sort of come from these previous like other movies and other franchises, and they will probably inform future franchises and movies in some way. Even if just like the way you work behind the camera.
Yeah. When you listen to filmmakers talk about how they made their movie, they will always reference other movies. And it's just a point of like getting the right, like learning the correct lessons from them. So like, the lesson from the MCU is get fresh voices and not make more movies.
Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, they're trying to like put auteur, like each movie's the idea, like they're pitching, like someone pitches their movie and then Kevin decides if it's a good fit. So then if it's a good fit, they get to make their movie.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're almost capturing the auteur a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, but there is some distillation.
Yeah, for sure. But a little bit, because that Thor Ragnarok is such a Taika Waititi movie.
Oh, for
sure.
sure.
And he cast all his friends in it. Like everyone,
yeah.
like the ladies from Hunt for the Wilder People, and the
yeah.
guy, the dad is in it. And,
yeah. Again, the push and pull, it's different for every movie, so
yeah,
it's always a crapshoot, but they get it right most of the time.
Plugs and handles and identifying information.
I'm on Twitter at Compenderizer. And that's pretty much all I have to plug at the moment. We have more stuff coming up soon that I'll talk about later.
More pluggables in maybe next week's episode or the one after that. Jack.
Yeah, I run a YouTube channel called Now You See It, which like discusses film tropes and themes and stuff. And that's it. That's my plug.
Cool.
No social media plugs?
I mean, my Twitter's JackNugent27. I guess, but I don't know. I don't really tweet on it.
Okay.
I mean, I do sometimes. So I just tweet the videos. Just like watch the videos. Just subscribe to the video, and then you'll get enough of me, I guess. I'll build a website one day. It's almost done. Not almost done, but I'm working on it. I'm
Very
actually
cool.
coding it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which makes it way harder.
I'm excited to see that and
Yeah,
the
'cause
prototype
it's like
and
nice
stuff
and
like
sleek
that.
and minimal. Or
Yeah.
That's the goal. It'll be
Very
nice.
jacknugent.me. Because jacknugent.com was taken. Oh, God.
God damn
I'm
it.
still not over it, dude. And it's some, like, dog. It's like a guy made a website for his dog. And it's, like, from 2006, dude. It sucks. And people are going to go to it and be like, yo, what the fuck is this? And,
I was very mad when I was trying to find a cool domain name, and I was literally searching for chris.cool, but lo and behold, someone owns chris.cool, and I'm very mad.
nice.
Not nice! No, I'm gonna
That's
find
nice
that
like, someone
motherfucker
would
and...
have taken that.
It's too low hanging.
Chris.cool. What about Chris.awesome?
not as succinct and catchy.
Chris.cool. Chris. Yeah.
Cool with a K? Did you try?
I refuse?
Okay.
Don't even check. You don't want to know if it's available.
Thank you guys very much for the enjoyable discussion. Thanks for. It's always fun when I have an idea and that becomes like 3 people's time for an hour and a half. So it makes me feel valued.
You are valued, Thomas.
And to our listeners, thanks for sticking with us. This is episode 27, which is pretty substantial. We're up there.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So tune in next week for whatever that episode is going to be. I think Chris is recording it tomorrow. So
yeah, it's gonna be on the sympathetic villains of the Spider-Man movies.
okay.
So we'll go all the way from Willem Dafoe to Michael Keaton and be like, why are these all sob stories?
You're doing that tomorrow?
Yeah, if all goes according to plan. But that is scheduled to be the episode after this.
Yeah, you guys are killing it. Once a week?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I do one video a month.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
Barely.
just you, right?
That's true. I do have a guy I'm going to hire to help me. Like my friend.
That's cool.
There you go.
I think there are
Not hire, he's just going to help me more.
there are many of us. We are legion.
How many of you are there?
5.
There's 5 of you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. What?
There's like too many
Where's the rest of
people. There's like too many people who host the podcast to like actually have them all on every episode.
Mm-hmm.
So
This will be 3 hours long if we get everyone on board.
yeah, you get the Venom episode if you get everybody in there.
Listen to the Venom episode. It's fascinating.
The Venom episode is the only episode we've recorded that like I was like listening to it at work and like cracking up. Like I could not stop laughing. I had to like pause it and like listen to it later because it was like not. I couldn't control myself.
That's fun. Okay.
Yeah.
That could be that'll be the first one.
It is.
Oh
a long
God.
one, so.
Okay.
All right.
Watch.
Cue music. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good night.
Rest in peace, Daredevil.